Welcome to our Biz Huddle podcast. I'm your host, Mitch Cuthbert, Creative Director at Baker Creative. If you haven't already subscribed to the channel, please hit subscribe so you can get notified when new content comes out. Please share this with anyone who could be inspired by it.
So if you could interview anyone, who would you interview?
Sometimes the best interviews aren't with someone famous.
Yeah, that's so true.
And I've learned that over the years. And I think I don't really get super psyched about someone. Well, even still, the really super famous people, usually they limit the time, or it's got to be at a certain time. And I don't do that. It's got to be on my time, on the show's time and stuff like that. So,
sure.
But I don't really ever have a good answer to that question. I might have said one day back in the past, before I actually interviewed them, I might have said Woodward and Bernstein.
Okay.
Of Watergate fame, because that was in 1973 and I graduated from high school in 1975, and I already knew I wanted to be a journalist since the third grade. So, that was very much in my, I was very aware of what was going on with Watergate. I think I was grounded the summer of the Watergate hearings. So I listened to all the Watergate hearings and, I was fascinated by that story and everything. But then I actually did get to interview them. Probably two or three years into the show, maybe even less than that, because I remember I was still very new to broadcast, and I might have handled things differently, but they were not easy on me. They were not easy to talk to. They were not. They were trying to sell a book, and that's fair. I mean, I interview a lot of authors, but so that might have been if there's just two people I could interview, it would be my heroes, from the Watergate era. But that can disappoint.
I understand.
Be surprised by somebody you've never heard of before and have a lovely, fun interview, in my opinion.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. So what would you think would be the biggest mistake that women in the media make today?
I don't know. I mean, I think women in the media are kicking butt and taking names. I think it's fabulous. I'm thrilled. It's wonderful to see more women covering sports, in a real fundamental way, instead of spike heels and tight dresses. I mean, I'm starting to see them. They're relaxing their dress codes. They're talking about stuff that matters to them. Women are very dominant in the state government and in state house reporting. Back when I was there were just a handful of us. I don't think they're making any mistakes. It's still kind of rough. I mean, when you look at the statistics, women still, even though many more of them graduate from J school every year, they're still not in upper management. It's still a very top-down business. Mm-hmm. And I think that's partly why. I mean, when I came off, I had an extended break for my maternity leave because I had a complication. Mm-hmm. And I had to have a break. Mm-hmm. But when I went right back to 10 and 12-hour days. I mean, there was nothing. There were no nursing rooms. There was nothing to help a new mom, adjust back to the workplace. Things are a lot better now. And I give all the credit to women for making that happen. So I just can't think of it. They're getting their education, getting degreed at higher rates than men. And not that it's a competition. I don't see it as a binary thing, but I think that they're doing a lot better job of mentoring each other, or women reaching out to women and working with each other. I think enough women are moving up the food chain that that's got a lot more potential than it might have even 20 years ago.
So how would you describe the overall state of the media and challenges being faced today?
Well, the overall state, the way I always describe it, it's like we're on rope bridge
Oof.
over a huge canyon,
Oh,
and
wow.
the bridge is unraveling. And the trick is to get to the other side of the canyon before the bridge completely unravels, because the business model as we knew it and as I grew up with it is changing,
Mhm.
and has changed massively. And the trick is to get journalism to the other side of that bridge before that business model falls apart, so that it's safe and sound. And a lot of what you see, I think some of the most exciting changes that are coming from that are nonprofit, or not for profit, uh, investigative journalism groups. They're all over the place now. They need money and they need resources, but they exist. And
Mhm.
that gives me a lot of hope for the future too. So there's new models popping up. Unfortunately, not enough to save my, or I shouldn't say my generation, because my generation's a baby boomer and we're retiring, but that next generation, people 10, 15 years younger than me, we've just lost a lot of great talent in the meantime.
Yeah.
They've fallen off the bridge on the way.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's kind of unfortunate. You can see that in many of the newsrooms across America, and even the digital space as well, as far as media relations. It's just not the same amount of people,
Right.
not even on social media, as far as engaging them. It's really kind of concerning.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, with journalism itself facing threats such as fake news, censorship, political and economic pressures, and the attacks on journalistic resources, how do you see the future of journalism itself?
Well, I think there'll always be journalism. Because there's always going to be another generation of people that identify as journalists, that
Mhm.
now they say they want to tell stories. There's always been a different kind of a lexicon through the ages, but and I think that it will be more collaborative between organizations. I think the conglomerates, Gannett, for one, is trying to do what it can to sustain that important public affairs reporting, say at the State House and that sort of a thing, by taking its member newspapers and joining forces. And there's a lot of good reasons, and I respect a lot of people that are doing it. I do worry about what's lost in the equation when you don't have the competition. You're not competing with who's going to get the next big break, your next big scoop, or whatever you want to call it.
Mhm.
But I think that's like trying to ask if a tree falls in the woods question. Do you hear it if nobody's there, right?
Right.
So I don't know. The multi-platform is going to become very important.
Mhm.
The podcast is already becoming very important. This age, our digital natives are very comfortable with podcasts.
Mhm.
It's what they do. So we have to respond to that. I think some podcasts are too long,
Yeah.
too about the podcaster and not enough about the topic.
Yep.
It's just a personal opinion I have. I think everybody thinks they can everybody thinks they can do my job, and everybody thinks they can podcast. Anybody could do my job, but I don't think anybody can podcast. I think it's
No,
a
no, I have to tell you, not everybody can do your job. I'm telling you flat, no.
well, you just got to stay humble, but not everybody can podcast, or at least everybody. It should be an art form. It's a skill.
Yes.
It's not just anybody who wants to, as somebody I know says, like to flap their lips. It's a skill. You want listeners. You got to be aware of that. And I think it's really interesting how podcast has evolved. Kind of, it seems like almost as an offshoot of like reality TV in a way.
Hmm.
Like the whole real crime thing is, I think, kind of fascinating. I'm not personally particularly interested in it, but I'm fascinated by the growth of it. And, that people are interested in that. And it's drawn such, to the point where there was a next Netflix show, Only Murders in the Building. That was fabulous, by the way. It made me a little more interested in the podcast. But So I think that's going to be a huge thing. We're going to have to change how we deliver the news. But my worry about all of that, because of how we deliver it. So here's the thing, we kind of take for granted, I don't know about you, but I grew up in a house with, you know, a newspaper on the counter every morning, a newspaper on the counter in the evening, magazines, and we were all sort of reading the same thing, and we were seeing, and everyone in our neighborhood was reading the same thing, and we were watching those, you know, 2 or 3 network news programs at night, and we were all kind of seeing the same thing. Now, there's good and bad about that. The good is that it's not that we're never going to argue as a society, but at least we're all arguing with the same set of facts.
Yeah.
That's not the case anymore. Even though there is no such thing as alternative facts, but we have to figure out a way to teach the generations to come kind of how to what's the word, figure out what matters, because we grew up knowing that on the top left of the newspaper, that's the or the, you know, banner headline across the top of the newspaper, that's the big story of the day.
Mhm.
Then there's the column on the right. That's the second biggest story of the day. Then there's the column on the bottom right. That's the third. And then on the far left was sort of that news of the weird kind of a story on the front page of the paper. Well, that's just been all blown up. And I have to, with my interns, I have to make sure that they're looking at the digital version of the paper so that they can even figure out what matters. Because the way they're getting their news, they may be reading Columbus Dispatch stories or New York Times or Wall Street Journal or whatever, but they're not reading it. They're reading it because someone sent it to them. They're on a feed. They've got, you know, they have a particular interest in a particular something. So when something pops up, like an old-fashioned listserv, they pop up, they get pushes to particular kinds of articles. What is missing is that broad perspective, seeing that front page and seeing kind of the news of the day, and seeing how people who are experienced at vetting the news are laying it out. And that's important. And we, like I said, we take it for granted that that's how we grew up. But the digital natives, a lot of them, not only did they not grow up with a newspaper, probably, or many of them not, but they certainly don't have any access or any proclivity to figure that out now. They just read what their friends are reading or what's on Twitter or what they saw, not on Facebook, because they're too cool for that now. But you know.
So with so much fake news out there on social, since I'm at 40 or 65% of the people get their news from Facebook. I mean, how do regular folks that are not writers, that are not savvy in the media, how do they discern the difference?
Well, you know, it takes some work. And that's what I'm worried about. You have to be self-conscious about it. You have to be conscientious about it. You have to be aware that there is this weakness in our system now. There were weaknesses in the other system. There are new weaknesses in this system of delivering the news now. And you have to be cognizant of it. So, you know, in my house growing up, we got a couple of newspapers, we got Time Magazine, we got Newsweek, we got all these different kinds of things. My parents didn't rely on just one source of information. They didn't listen to just, you know, we listened to, you know, my dad would go back and forth between, you know, the news channels. I mean, they were very deliberate about that. And then I was lucky enough to be exposed to it. And so was my son. So we're kind of, in some cases, it's just a matter of kind of retraining people. In other cases, it's a situation where these are people who have never been exposed to good news judgment habits in the first place.
True.
So I don't know. I mean, in the fake news, you know what, I just talked to a group last week about this. If they're not putting their name on the story, there's an issue.
Yeah.
Or it's an editorial, an unsigned editorial for a news outlet that's going to stand behind that editorial. If they're not sourcing things properly, if they're not giving you sources, if they're not telling you who said it, if they're not giving you citations, if they're don't have links built in, which is a very easy thing to do now, is build in links. Any good news outlet has links built in throughout a story, giving you access to previous stories written about this, giving access to organizations they're talking about, or whatever it might be. If that's not there, then that's a problem. And that should be a big red flag to people, because I've gone on some of the alternative news sites and they don't quote, they don't cite, they don't source, they don't give you links going back and build, substantiating their assertions and what they're saying. If they aren't doing that, that's a big red flag.
I agree. And sometimes you're just like, I hope no one really believes some of this stuff, because it's so crazy.
Well,
some of it,
but we know some people do believe it. We know they do.
I know they do.
It's a situation.
It is. And sometimes we'll argue bar none about it. And I'm like, when we saw it on Facebook, and I'm like, so really?
Could you be one better, please. Yeah. I know.
Please don't.
It's hilarious.
Yeah, I know. And I know things get scooped early on in Twitter, and there's all kinds of different mediums respond differently to different stories at different cadence. And I get that. It's just the social aspect of it is very fascinating.
Yeah. I think, this didn't get a lot of play, and I don't know how much they're doing it anymore, but for a while, Twitter was, if you shared something that you saw on Twitter, they would say, they could tell, their algorithm could tell that you hadn't actually clicked on it and read it.
Yeah.
And a lot of times I would share things because I'd already read it, but then I'd see it on Twitter, and I said, and I thought, oh yeah, I did read it.
Yeah.
But it did. I thought that was a small but good idea to just make people stop and think, and to be a little more circumspect. Why don't you read this, or read half of it, or read the first 3 paragraphs of it before you share it? Yeah. Not just the headline, not just because of who shared it, but read it for yourself.
I have seen some news outlets that have adopted a lot of the yellow journalism, and just it's been kind of unfortunate that some of that has been almost pulled up higher on the page than it ever was before. And you click through, and it's like crazy stories and crazy slideshows. And I'm like, I think it degrades the credibility of the news outlet personally.
Well, but I remember back in the day when they thought putting the sticky note ads on the front page was like an abomination. So, it's been a slippery slope for a long time.
Yeah.
There's a lot of paid stuff in the newspaper that wasn't written locally.
I know. I totally agree with you.
Yeah.
And sometimes you can't unsee some of the things you see on social. You're like, oh, please, why today when I was on it?
Yeah.
So when you're trying to determine your shows, how do you figure out what's the great stories to highlight?
Well, we try to, tear our shows from the headlines. That's where I tell the interns, I think a lot of times, and we've all been guilty of it at one time or another as journalists, just, doing the Ride Along with Cop show, which, big deal, right? Unless there's a story on the front page that says a Ride Along with the Cop went awry when some gunman took out the officer and somebody was in the back seat riding along with the officer, then it's a show. And then I would gladly do a show about the history of Ride Along with Cop, events and things like that. But to me, it's what's in the news is absolutely that drives everything we do. Some things have a little more shelf life than others, but we try to get to it ASAP while it's what people are talking about and it's what's in the news. Yeah, absolutely.
I agree. And so this is my last question. So if you had to leave a legacy, what would that be?
I would like to just leave a legacy of a continued strong journalistic bend to the talk show when I leave. I would like to see it sustained, improved, but that would take more human resources. I think, we've got a beautiful new building and we've got a beautiful new studio, and I'm hoping it'll be used for a long, long time, long after I'm gone, to get the news and the important topics of the day out to the listeners. I guess that would be my legacy. And also, I hope that people that by doing so much public affairs out of the State House that people are becoming more educated about the State House. Because back in the day when I covered state government and politics, editors were always telling us, oh, that's too in the weeds. And it's like, yeah, but the weeds are where the bad stuff is happening. So if we keep walking away from the weeds, we just don't get into it. And people need to know what's going on over there. And they need it in a kind of a granular way, that these are just people who happen to run for public office and happen to get elected. And not all of them are, people need to know what their elected officials are doing, or, that's a big problem for our democracy. And that therein lies the fourth estate, a la journalists, and covering them.
Well, especially in a world where trust is eroded so badly across the news outlets and with brands, and businesses are starting to come back a little bit, but there is, and you can't blame people. I mean, with the fake news, and you can't discern, and you don't know what's real, and the propaganda, and it just becomes overwhelming. So, well, thank you so much for your time. It's been so exciting to have you as part of our.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it, Michelle.
Yes, I respect so much the stuff that you do, and what you tell and inform people about it's a big need.
Thank you. Thanks a lot for having me. I really appreciate it.
If you haven't already subscribed to the channel, please hit subscribe so you can get notified when new content comes out. Please share this with anyone who could be inspired by it, and feel free to post any questions so we can be inspired by new content. Thanks for listening. If you're interested in learning more, visit our website at bakercreative.co.